Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into a topic today that a lot of you have been asking about.
Yeah.
Expressing your opinions in English.
hmm
We've got a whole bunch of sources lined up with tons of useful tips and tricks to help you speak your mind confidently and clearly.
It's really interesting.
Oh
A
yeah.
lot of English learners learn basic phrases,
Yeah.
but they don't always grasp the nuances, like
Yeah.
when to use one phrase over another.
Totally.
It's not just about the words themselves, it's
Yeah.
how you use them
Right.
to really make your opinions resonate.
It's like you already know how to say I think, but when do you say I believe?
Exactly.
Or when's it better to kind of hold back and say
Right.
it seems to me?
Yes.
Those are the kind of questions we're going to be tackling today.
Yeah, for sure.
It's like if you're in a meeting at work and you want to disagree with your boss,
Oh, yeah.
you probably wouldn't just say you're wrong.
Definitely not.
But there are ways to express disagreement without,
Right?
causing offense. Respectfully, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump right in. We're going to start with those kind of like basic phrases
Yeah.
for expressing your opinion.
The foundation.
The foundation. Yeah, exactly. Our sources have a whole bunch listed.
Uh-huh.
But we're going to break them down one by one and see how they work in different situations.
Okay.
Start with I think.
Yeah. One of the most common ones.
Right.
It's pretty straightforward and versatile,
Mm-hmm.
but it can also sound a little weak
Oh.
if you're trying to make a strong point.
Okay, so when would you actually recommend using I think?
Well, it's great for casual conversations or when you're expressing like a simple preference,
Mhm.
like, I think this new coffee shop is great.
Mm.
It's light.
Mm-hmm.
It's easygoing.
Right.
It doesn't demand a ton of attention.
Yeah, it's just kind of like putting it out there.
Right.
All right, what about in my opinion? I feel like I hear that one a lot, especially in like more formal settings.
More formal. Yeah, you're right. In my opinion, it adds a little touch of formality to it.
Uh-huh.
It shows you've given the topic some thought
Okay.
and you're ready to present a considered viewpoint.
So if I'm like trying to sound more professional,
Yes,
in my opinion, would be a good choice.
absolutely.
Right.
Like saying, hey, I've weighed the options and here's where I stand.
Mm-hmm.
It's very effective in like a business meeting or a presentation.
Right, much more serious.
Yes.
Okay, now what about I believe?
I believe.
One of our sources mentioned this phrase carries like a bit more weight.
It does. I
Yeah.
believe is powerful
Okay.
because it conveys a sense of conviction.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that you're not easily swayed
Okay.
and that you really stand behind your viewpoint.
So it's like you're putting your foot down and saying, this is what I truly believe,
Exactly.
and I'm not backing down.
Yes, but that same conviction can backfire.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
I believe.
Yeah.
Can come across as a little stubborn
Okay.
or inflexible.
Especially in casual conversations with friends.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to shut down a friendly debate
Yeah.
by being too forceful.
Exactly.
So context is key here.
It is.
You got to read the room
Yes, always read the room.
and adjust your style accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
One of our sources mentioned, as far as I'm concerned,
Uh-huh.
and I feel like that one's a little more...
It is a little more direct.
Yeah.
It's like you're drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is my perspective, take it or leave it.
Wow.
It's less about inviting discussion
Okay.
and more about just stating your position clearly.
So it's good when you want to be direct and assertive,
Yes.
but maybe not the best choice for like a sensitive topic.
That's right.
Or when you're trying to build consensus.
Exactly.
Like, as far as I'm concerned, this is the best pizza place in town.
Yeah.
Okay, this is already making me rethink how I express myself.
Good.
I'm starting to see these phrases in a whole new light. That's what we're here for.
So we've covered the basics, I
Mhm.
think, in my opinion, and I believe.
Yeah.
But before we move on, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier.
Okay.
Cultural differences.
Yes.
One of the sources really highlights how expressing your opinion can vary drastically across cultures.
It's true, and it's a crucial point.
Right.
What might be considered polite and assertive in one culture
Mm-hmm.
could be perceived as aggressive or rude in another.
Right. And I think a lot of English learners struggle with this,
Yeah.
especially if they're coming from a culture
Yeah.
with very different communication norms. Like, for example, a lot of Asian cultures prioritize harmony and indirect communication.
That's
Or
right.
like directly contradicting someone or expressing a really strong opinion could be seen as disrespectful.
Yeah, you have to be careful.
So if you're in that kind of setting, you really want to be more subtle and diplomatic in your approach. Like, instead of saying, I disagree, you might say something like, that's an interesting perspective, but have you considered?
That's a good one.
Right. Much softer.
It's about finding ways to express your opinion without creating conflict.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how much goes into expressing opinions effectively.
It's a lot.
It's not just grammar and vocabulary. It's about understanding like these social and cultural contexts as well.
Absolutely.
This is fantastic. I'm already feeling more confident about expressing myself in English.
That's great.
And remember, it's a journey. The more you practice and experiment, the more natural these phrases will become.
It'll get easier.
Okay, so we've covered the basics of I think, in my opinion, and I believe, and we've touched on the importance of cultural context.
Yes.
What's next?
Well, now that we've kind of explored these foundational phrases,
Okay.
let's talk about how to add some extra punch to your opinions.
Okay.
Because simply stating your viewpoint is one thing.
But making it truly resonate with others requires a bit more finesse.
Okay. I'm all ears. Let's dive into that in part 2.
Let's go. Okay, so we've got our opinion, and we've picked a good phrase for the situation.
Right.
But how do we make it stick?
Yeah. How do we make it memorable? Like, I think this is a good idea doesn't always cut it.
Right.
What else can we add to really drive that point home?
Well, one of the simplest yet most effective techniques is to back up your opinion with a reason.
Okay.
And a great way to do that is to use the word because.
Oh, because. Okay.
It just adds this extra layer of explanation, right? You're not just saying your opinion.
Okay.
You're giving the why behind it.
Right.
So instead of saying like,
yeah,
I think we should invest in renewable energy, you could say, I believe we should invest in renewable energy because it's crucial for a sustainable future.
Oh, that's so much better.
You see how that because adds weight and makes your opinion more convincing?
Yeah, it's not just like throwing an opinion out there.
Right.
You're actually building a case for it.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's a good one. What other strategies can we use to support our opinions?
Another powerful technique is to use specific examples.
Oh, examples.
Yes. Let's say you're arguing that remote work can boost productivity.
Okay.
Instead of just stating that opinion, you could say something like,
Yeah.
I think remote work can boost productivity because it allows employees to work in environments where they feel most comfortable and focused. For example, a study by, and then you could mention a credible source,
Right.
showed that remote workers reported a 13% increase in productivity compared to their in-office counterparts.
Oh, wow. That's a much stronger argument.
Right.
It's not just like remote work is good.
Yeah.
You've got that evidence to back it up.
Exactly. It makes it concrete and relatable.
And relatable, yeah. You're like painting a picture for the listener,
Yes.
not just telling them what to think.
Precisely. And speaking of painting a picture,
Oh, yeah.
anecdotes can be really powerful tools too.
Anecdotes.
Yeah, like personal stories.
Okay.
Sharing a relevant story can draw people in and make your opinion more memorable.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So like instead of just saying, I think this restaurant is great, I could tell a story about like my own positive experience there.
Exactly. You could say, I think you'd love this new Italian place because they have the most amazing pasta dishes. Last time I was there, I had their truffle ravioli, and it was honestly the best pasta I've ever had.
Oh, now I want to go there.
Right.
You've not only given your opinion, you've also like made me hungry.
Created a vivid image.
A very vivid image.
And made them curious to try it themselves.
That's such a good tip.
Is it?
I'm going to start incorporating anecdotes into my conversations way more often.
I think you should.
Okay, now what about when you want to like emphasize a point?
Okay.
Is there a way to do that without sounding too forceful?
Yeah, for sure. Using phrases like, in fact, or studies have shown, can really drive home your point without sounding aggressive.
Okay.
Like you could say, in fact, research has shown that spending time in nature can reduce stress and boost creativity.
Oh, that's good.
See?
You're not just saying, I think nature's good for you. It's like, bam!
Exactly.
You've got the research to back it up.
You're adding credibility to your opinion.
Love that.
Yeah.
Now, what if you have like multiple reasons for your opinion?
Okay.
How do you like structure those effectively?
You can use phrases like, one reason is, or another reason is, to present your arguments clearly.
Okay.
For example, one reason I support this initiative is that it promotes economic growth.
Yeah.
Another reason is that it creates jobs in the community.
Okay. So you're like laying it all out, making it super clear.
This structured approach makes it easy to follow.
Yeah. It's like you're building a solid case, brick by brick.
I like that.
All right. We've talked a lot about how to support our opinions effectively. But what about those times when we need to agree or disagree with someone else?
Oh, that's a good one.
That can be tricky.
It can be.
Especially in English.
Yeah, navigating agreements and disagreements gracefully is so important for good communication.
Totally. And it's something that a lot of English learners find challenging.
It is.
So let's start with agreeing.
Okay.
What are some simple ways to express agreement in English that go beyond just saying, I agree?
Well, you could say things like, that's true, or I think you're right.
Okay.
To express even stronger agreement, you can use phrases like, I couldn't agree more, or you have a point there.
Okay.
These phrases convey that you're fully on board with the other person's opinion.
Got it. But what about when you don't fully agree, but you don't want to start an argument?
Yes.
How do you disagree politely?
Good question.
Especially in a professional setting or something.
One key strategy is to acknowledge the other person's viewpoint before presenting your own counterargument.
Okay.
So you could say something like,
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from, but I have a different perspective on that.
That's a good word.
This shows respect for their opinion, even if you don't fully share it.
Yeah, it keeps the conversation respectful.
Right.
Right.
And instead of directly saying, I disagree.
Yeah, which can sound kind of harsh.
It can be a little strong.
Yeah.
You can use softer phrases like, I'm not sure about that, or that's not how I see it.
Okay.
You can also use phrases like, I see your point, but,
right,
to signal that you've considered their perspective, but you still hold a different opinion.
It's about finding that balance.
It is.
Between being assertive but also respectful.
Yes.
Like, we can agree to disagree, but let's keep the conversation going.
Exactly.
Now, let's say someone wants to, express themselves in a more eloquent or sophisticated way. What are some more, advanced expressions they could use to share their opinions?
Yes. For those looking to add a little finesse to their language, there are some fantastic options.
Okay, bring them on.
One of my favorites is, from my perspective.
Ooh, from my perspective.
It's a great way to emphasize that you're sharing your own personal viewpoint. For example, from my perspective, the benefits of this approach outweigh the risks.
Okay, so it's like you're saying, hey, this is how I see it.
Exactly, through your unique lens.
I like that. What other gems do we have?
It seems to me that is another good one.
Okay.
It allows you to express your opinion tentatively. Like when you're not entirely certain or you want to invite further discussion, you might say, it seems to me that this policy might have unintended consequences.
It's like you're putting the idea out there.
Yeah.
But you're not being super forceful about it.
It encourages a more collaborative approach.
Yeah, love that.
And for those who love a good debate.
Oh, yeah.
Or want to sound more academic, I would argue that is fantastic.
Okay.
For instance, I would argue that investing in early childhood education is one of the most effective ways to improve societal outcomes.
Oh, that's a good one.
It signals that you're ready to back up your claim with some solid reasoning.
Like you're saying, I'm not just sharing an opinion here. I've got the logic and the evidence to support it.
Exactly.
Okay, any other advanced expressions you want to share before we move on?
Sure. For a more formal tone, you can use, I'm of the opinion that.
Okay.
It's often used in professional settings or when you want to express a carefully considered viewpoint.
Okay.
For example, I'm of the opinion that we need a more comprehensive approach to address this issue.
Like you've weighed all the options.
Yes.
And this is your conclusion.
Precisely.
So many good expressions to choose from.
There are.
This is giving me so many ideas for how to express myself better.
I'm glad.
Now, before we wrap up this part,
okay,
I want to circle back to something we talked about earlier. Cultural differences.
Yep.
It's such an important part of communication.
It is.
And I think it deserves a little more attention.
I agree.
We've got to remember that good communication goes way beyond just grammar and vocabulary.
Right.
It's about understanding the context.
Absolutely, the cultural context.
Yeah, where those words are spoken and received.
And how they might be interpreted differently.
Right. It's like we're speaking the same language, but with different accents.
Yes.
What might be considered polite and assertive in one culture could be aggressive or even offensive in another.
Exactly. We talked about Asian cultures valuing harmony.
Right.
And indirect communication.
But there are so many other nuances to consider.
Oh, there are.
Like in some cultures, it's considered rude to interrupt someone even if you disagree with them.
It is true.
But in others, lively debate and interruptions are seen as like a sign of engagement and passion.
It's fascinating how different it can be.
It really is. So how do we navigate these differences? How do we be ourselves, but also be respectful of other cultures?
That's the million-dollar goal.
Yeah.
There's no easy answer.
Okay.
It takes time and effort
Uh-huh.
and a willingness to learn and adapt.
Right.
But here are a few tips that might help.
Okay.
First, be observant.
Mm.
Pay attention to how people communicate in different settings.
Okay.
Notice their tone, their body language, the phrases they use.
So it's about being mindful and
Yes.
picking up on those subtle cues.
Exactly, like noticing if people tend to be more direct
Right.
or indirect.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yes, good point.
If you're not sure about something, just ask.
Most people appreciate the effort,
Right.
and they're usually happy to explain.
Sometimes we're so worried about saying the wrong thing
Oh, my hell.
that we forget to just ask for help.
It's true.
Okay, what's your last tip?
Well, remember that it's a journey.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to make mistakes along the way,
That's okay.
and that's okay.
Yeah.
The important thing is to learn from those mistakes
Mm-hmm.
and keep growing.
This has been so insightful.
Good.
I feel like I'm seeing communication in a whole new light.
That's what we're hoping for.
It's not just about words.
No, it's not.
It's about understanding the person you're talking to
Yeah.
and the context of the conversation.
The whole picture.
Yeah, the whole picture.
That's what makes communication so fascinating
It really is.
and rewarding.
It's a constant process.
It is.
Of learning and adapting and connecting.
Yes.
Okay, we've covered so much today.
We have.
From basic phrases to advanced expressions to even cultural considerations.
This has been quite a deep dive.
It has been a deep dive.
I hope our listeners are feeling empowered
Me too.
to express their opinions more confidently
Yes.
and effectively.
Okay, before we move on to our final part,
Okay.
I want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Sorry.
We've talked about choosing the right phrases and being mindful of cultural context.
Yes.
But ultimately, expressing your opinion is about using your voice authentically
Yes.
and having meaningful conversation.
That's beautifully said.
So with that in mind, let's move on to the last part of our exploration where we'll talk about putting all of this into practice.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've made it to the final part of our deep dive into expressing your opinions in English.
We have.
We've covered so much.
Yeah.
From those basic phrases like I think and in my opinion, to some really insightful strategies for like adding weight to your arguments and navigating cultural differences.
It's been a lot.
It has been a lot, but now comes the fun part,
Yes.
putting it all into practice.
Exactly. Knowledge is power,
Uh-huh.
but it's only truly valuable when you actually use it.
So true. So where do we begin?
Yeah.
What's the first step in actually becoming more confident and effective at expressing our opinions?
I think the key is to start small
Okay.
and build momentum.
Okay.
You don't have to jump into a heated debate right away. Just look for opportunities in your everyday conversations
Yeah.
to practice those phrases and techniques we've talked about.
So baby steps.
Baby steps, yeah.
Like maybe start by sharing your opinion on a movie with a friend or discussing a current event with a colleague.
Exactly. Those low-pressure situations
Oh.
are perfect for testing out new phrases
Mm-hmm.
and seeing how they feel.
And not being afraid to make mistakes.
Of course.
I think so many English learners,
Yeah.
myself included, get so caught up in trying to be perfect
Right.
that we end up saying nothing at all.
It's a common trap.
It is.
But remember, fluency isn't about perfection.
Mm-hmm.
It's about communication.
Right.
And mistakes are just opportunities to learn and grow.
You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
Exactly.
So we've got those low-pressure conversations to get us started. What else can we do to really level up our skills?
Once you're comfortable with the basics,
Yeah.
challenge yourself.
Okay.
Step outside your comfort zone a little.
Ah.
Well, you could join an English conversation group,
Okay.
participate in an online forum,
Mm-hmm.
or even give a presentation at work.
Oh, wow.
Right.
So it's about like progressively increasing the challenge.
Yes, exactly.
Like working your way up to that marathon by starting with short runs.
And the best part is each step you take boosts your confidence.
Oh, that's good.
You'll start to notice that those phrases that felt awkward at first become second nature.
And before you know it, you're expressing yourself with ease and fluency.
That's the goal.
What a transformation.
It is.
I think one of my biggest takeaways from this whole deep dive
Yeah.
is that expressing your opinions in English isn't just about learning phrases.
Right.
It's about developing a mindset
Yes.
of confidence and authenticity.
Absolutely got it.
It's about embracing your unique voice
Yeah.
and sharing it with the world.
That's beautifully said.
And remembering that it's a journey,
Mhm.
not a destination.
Always room for growth.
Always room for growth. Well, I think we've covered just about everything we set out to explore today.
I think so too.
What a deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It really has.
I hope our listeners are feeling ready to go out there
Me too.
and express themselves.
With confidence and clarity.
Yes.
So as we wrap up,
Okay.
I want to leave you with one final thought.
All right.
What's one small step you can take today to start putting all of these techniques into practice?
Good question.
Maybe it's sharing your opinion about a book you're reading.
Yes.
Or having a little friendly debate with a coworker.
Or even just leaving a comment online.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
remember that each step you take brings you closer to fluency and confidence.
And the world needs to hear your voice.
So go out there and express yourselves.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
All right, let's dive into this expressing opinions in English thing.
Sounds good.
You've given us some really interesting resources to dig into.
Yeah. It's a pretty important topic, right? Getting your thoughts across clearly and confidently.
Exactly. So we want to help you unlock that power of expressing yourself, especially in English.
I mean, it's more than just saying what you think.
Oh, yeah.
It's about, connecting with people.
Oh, okay.
Sharing your perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And even, influencing how things turn out.
Interesting.
One of the articles you shared really hit on this, how crucial this skill is in all sorts of situations.
What kind of situation?
Not just casual chats with friends,
Yeah.
but professional settings, presentations, even negotiations.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like high stakes.
Definitely. And something that stood out to me from that same article was the idea that expressing an opinion, it's not about being right or wrong.
Oh,
It's more about contributing your own unique perspective.
right. So adding to the conversation.
Exactly. And that kind of takes the pressure off, right?
For sure.
It's not about winning a debate or anything. It's more about sharing your insights.
So how do we actually go about doing that?
Well, that's where having a cool kit of phrases can be super helpful.
Okay. Like what?
The source material had some good ones. Everything from simple things like, I think,
Yeah.
to more formal options like, in my opinion.
So different tools for different jobs, I guess.
Exactly.
But how do you know which phrase to use when? I think this movie's awesome. Works great with friends.
Right.
But maybe not so much in a board meeting.
You got it. That's a really key point. Context is everything.
Makes sense.
And actually, one of the sources goes into detail about that.
Oh, cool.
The nuances of choosing the right phrase depending on who you're talking to, the situation,
Mm-hmm.
and how formal you need to be.
I see. So it's not just about learning a bunch of phrases. It's about the strategy behind them, too.
Exactly. For example, if you're hanging out with your friends, you can be more direct and informal. Things like, I feel, or personally, I think.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward.
But in a professional setting, you might want to choose something a bit more measured, like from my perspective, or it seems to me that.
Gotcha. So it's about adapting to the situation and the people you're with.
Absolutely. And speaking of adapting, one of the sources also talked about how cultural differences can play a role in all of this.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Different cultures have different ways of communicating, right?
Absolutely.
So, in some cultures, being direct is totally fine.
Mm-hmm.
But in others, it might seem rude.
Right.
And this can be tricky for someone learning English because they're not just learning the language itself, but also these unspoken rules of communication.
It's like double the challenge.
Exactly. So our listener definitely needs to be aware of these cultural nuances.
To avoid misunderstandings and stuff.
Exactly.
So how can they navigate those differences? Any advice?
One tip from the source material was to observe how native speakers express their opinions in different situations.
Okay, so watch and learn.
Exactly. Pay attention to their tone, their body language, the specific phrases they use.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
Like learning a new dance, you got to watch and learn the steps before you can hit the dance floor,
I like that analogy.
Yeah. It's all about immersing yourself and picking up on those subtle cues.
So, okay, we've talked about the different phrases.
Right.
But the source material also mentioned not just stating an opinion, but adding weight to it.
Absolutely. You don't just want to say what you think, you want to explain why.
So how do we do that?
Well, that's where giving reasons and evidence comes in.
Okay, so instead of just saying, I think online learning is effective, what would you say?
You could say something like, I think online learning is effective because it allows for flexible scheduling and personalized pacing.
Okay, so you're adding that because to kind of strengthen your statement?
Exactly. It's like backing up your opinion with solid reasoning.
So it's more convincing.
Exactly.
What about using examples?
Examples are great. Instead of just saying, I think social media can be addictive,
Yeah.
you could say something like, I think social media can be addictive because it's designed to keep us engaged with notifications and personalized content.
Oh, right. So the example helps illustrate your point.
Exactly. And it makes it more relatable, too.
What about citing like research or studies? I think the source material mentioned that too.
Oh, that's a really powerful technique, especially if you're in a more formal setting, like giving a presentation or something.
Okay.
You could say something like, studies have shown that spending time in nature reduces stress levels.
So you're not just sharing your opinion, you're grounding it in facts.
Exactly.
Cool. So we've covered like the basics of stating your opinion,
Right.
choosing the right phrase for the situation and the culture, and then making it stronger with reasons, examples, evidence.
And don't forget, practice is key.
Right. The more you use these techniques,
The more natural and confident you'll become.
makes sense. Oh, and one of the sources actually has a practice scenario built in.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, they present like a sample opinion
Mm-hmm.
and encourage you to come up with different ways to say it using the techniques we just discussed.
It's a great way to see how these phrases actually work in a real-life context.
So for our listener, I definitely recommend checking that out.
Yeah, put yourself in that situation, imagine the person you're talking to,
Right.
and try out different phrases, see how they feel.
Because the goal isn't to like memorize a script.
No, it's more about internalizing the techniques.
Yeah, so they become a natural part of how you communicate.
Exactly.
Awesome. So I guess the big takeaway here is to find your voice
Yes.
and feel empowered to share it.
And share your perspective with the world.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, welcome back. So we've got those basic phrases down.
Right. Like, I think, and in my opinion.
Exactly. And now we can get into some more, I guess you could say, advanced techniques.
Okay. I'm ready to level up my opinion game.
Perfect. One of the sources talked about using phrases like, from my perspective, or it seems to me that,
So what makes those more advanced? They seem pretty similar.
well, they add a bit more nuance, like from my perspective, kind of implies you've really thought about the situation.
Oh!
Like you've looked at it from your own unique angle.
Right. Makes sense.
And
I
it
think
seems to me that it's a bit softer, right?
Oh, how so?
It acknowledges that your opinion's based on what you know right now, but it could change.
Interesting. So it's not like you're setting anything in stone.
Exactly. There's room for discussion and maybe even changing your mind.
I see. That's cool.
And then there's, I would argue that.
Oh, yeah. That one sounds pretty strong.
It is. It's definitely more for like a debate or an academic discussion.
Okay, so not for just casual conversation.
Probably not, unless you and your friends are really into debating. Haha.
True. But in those formal settings, it shows you're ready to back up what you're saying.
Exactly. You've got your evidence and your reasoning all lined up.
Right. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important skill, navigating agreement and disagreement,
Ooh, that is a big one.
especially in professional settings.
Yeah, got to keep things respectful.
Exactly. Got to keep those relationships strong, even if you don't see eye to eye on everything.
Totally. I've been in meetings where things got a little heated because people weren't disagreeing very well.
Oh, for sure, it happens.
Yeah.
But luckily, one of the sources we have actually gives some great phrases for agreeing and disagreeing politely.
Oh, perfect timing. What are some of them?
Well, for agreeing, you've got your classics like, I agree with you, or that's a valid point. But you can also go a bit stronger with something like, I couldn't agree more, or you're absolutely right.
And those are fine for a professional setting.
Absolutely. They show enthusiasm and support.
Okay, cool.
Disagreeing is where it gets trickier.
Yeah, how do you disagree without, causing conflict?
It's all about acknowledging the other person's perspective while still expressing your own.
Okay, so like what would that sound like?
Phrases like, I see your point, but, or I understand where you're coming from, however, can be really helpful.
So you're kind of creating a bridge between the two opinions.
Exactly. Instead of just shutting the other person down with a flat no.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
One source also suggested things like, I'm not sure I agree with that, or I have a different perspective on this.
Those sound a lot softer, less confrontational.
Exactly. And sometimes you might actually agree with part of what they're saying, but not all of it.
Oh, yeah, that happens all the time.
You could say something like, I agree with you up to a point, but...
Oh, I like that. It's like finding common ground while still being true to your own opinion.
Exactly. These phrases can really help keep that conversation flowing and productive.
I'm already feeling more equipped to handle those tough conversations, just hearing these examples.
That's great to hear. It's amazing how powerful language can be, right?
Absolutely.
And remember, practice makes perfect. The more you use these phrases in real life, the more natural they'll become.
Okay, practice, practice, practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And speaking of real life situations, let's circle back to cultural differences.
Oh, right. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, it's such a crucial part of communication, especially when you're expressing your opinion.
I remember one of the sources mentioned that in some cultures, it's considered rude to directly contradict someone, especially if they're in a position of authority.
Absolutely. And that can be a tough one to navigate.
So what can our listener do in those situations?
Well, in those cultures, it's often more appropriate to express disagreement indirectly.
Oh, interesting. How would you do that?
For example, instead of saying, I disagree with that decision, you might say something like, could we consider alternative options?
That's really clever. You're still getting your point across, but in a way that's respectful of the cultural norms.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that cultural norms can vary even within a single country.
Oh, right. Like different regions or social groups might have their own way of doing things.
Exactly. So being observant and asking questions is key.
So you can adapt your communication style as needed.
Exactly. And it all ties back to that active listening we were talking about.
Oh, right. Listening to how others express their opinions.
Yeah, you can learn so much from observing how other people navigate these conversations.
That's like a masterclass in communication.
Exactly.
So being mindful and respectful of the cultural context is key.
Absolutely. And by doing that, we can build stronger relationships and have more meaningful conversations.
Awesome. I think we've covered a lot of ground in this section.
We have. We've gone from those basic phrases to some more nuanced techniques for expressing opinions.
And we've talked about the art of agreeing and disagreeing politely.
And of course, we can't forget about those all-important cultural considerations.
Right, it's all connected.
But the most important thing to remember is that mastering these skills takes time.
Yeah, it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. So don't get discouraged if you don't feel super confident right away.
Keep practicing, keep experimenting.
And most importantly, don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Mistakes are just opportunities to learn.
Exactly.
All right, welcome back to the final part of our deep dive on expressing opinions in English.
We've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have from basic phrases to navigating all those cultural differences.
It's been quite the journey.
Yeah, but I think it's important to remember, expressing yourself clearly, it's not like a one-time thing.
It's an ongoing process, right?
Absolutely. Like you're never really done learning and growing in how you communicate.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect. It's about, like you said, constantly learning and adapting your style.
And one of the sources actually gave some tips for how to practice expressing opinions in everyday life,
Oh, that's a good one.
like actually putting it into action.
Yeah. They basically said to look for opportunities to share your thoughts,
Like with friends, family, colleagues, or even like in meetings or presentations.
Exactly. It's all about stepping out of that comfort zone and embracing those chances to practice.
Doesn't have to be anything fancy.
No, not at all.
Even just sharing your opinion on a movie or a book, it all helps.
It does. And remember, it's not just about talking.
Oh, yeah, right. Listening is super important, too.
Absolutely. Paying attention to how other people express their opinions, it's like a free lesson.
Totally. You can pick up new phrases, see how they use their tone and body language.
You get to see how they handle those agreements and disagreements.
It's like having a front row seat to a master class in communication, right?
You said it. Especially if you're observing someone you really admire for their communication skills.
Exactly. And we can't forget about reading.
Oh, good point.
Like news articles, opinion pieces, even fiction.
Yeah, seeing how writers express their views, that can be really helpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It expands your vocabulary, and you start to understand the nuances of language better.
Totally. So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Like practice speaking, actively listen, and read widely. And throughout all of that, remember to enjoy the process,
Don't get hung up on being perfect.
Yeah, mistakes are going to happen.
They are, and honestly, they're how we learn.
I love that perspective. Like mistakes are just part of getting better.
Absolutely.
But I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is to, find your own voice and let it be heard.
Yes. That's so important.
Don't be afraid to share what makes you, you.
Share your perspective with the world.
And, the cool thing is, when you express your opinions authentically and respectfully,
It opens up so many possibilities.
totally, you can connect with people on a deeper level.
Absolutely.
Learn and grow.
Have an influence how things unfold.
Exactly. And who knows, you might even inspire someone else to find their voice too.
What a great thought.
So to our listener out there, keep exploring
Keep practicing.
and keep sharing your voice with the world.
You got this.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep on learning and growing.